On my 21st birthday, my father gave me a letter. He didn't know I'd already found the truth. The evening light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room as my father cleared his throat for what felt like the 100th time. Everyone else had gone home after my modest birthday celebration, leaving just the two of us sitting across from each other in uncomfortable silence. I could tell he was nervous by the way he kept adjusting his tie, a habit from his corporate days that never quite died, even as his company had. "Emma," he said finally, pulling an aged envelope from his breast pocket. "I've been waiting for this day since you were born." I smiled politely, the way I'd practiced in my mirror for weeks. His eyes shimmered with what anyone else might mistake for fatherly pride. I knew better now. 21 years, he continued, turning the envelope in his hands like it contained something sacred. "Your grandfather would be so proud of the woman you've become." Grandfather. A man I barely remembered except through fading photographs and stories that grew grander with each retelling. The successful real estate mogul who'd built the foundation our family name once stood proudly upon. The man whose foresight had supposedly secured my future through a trust fund I'd never see. "I remember the day he set this up for you," Dad said, his voice taking on that reminiscent quality he reserved for his carefully curated family mythology. "He said to me, 'Richard, make sure this girl gets every opportunity you did,' and I promised him I would." I nodded, swallowing the bitter laugh that threatened to escape. 3 months ago, such a speech would have moved me. 3 months ago, I might have believed him. He handed me the envelope with a slight tremble in his fingers. It was sealed with actual wax, dark blue with our family crest pressed into it. A theatrical touch so perfectly aligned with my father's flair for dramatic gestures. The paper was expensive, cream-colored stationery that felt heavy in my hands. "The trust fund your grandfather left you becomes legally yours today," he said, watching me closely. "Everything we've been talking about all these years, it's finally yours to control." Everything we've been talking about. The phantom inheritance that would fund my graduate studies. The foundation that would help launch my career without the burden of student loans. The safety net that made me different from my struggling classmates. All of it a lie. "Aren't you gonna open it?" he prompted, leaning forward slightly. I broke the seal with careful precision, pulling out a handwritten letter penned in my father's unmistakable slanted cursive. The same handwriting I'd seen on the withdrawal slips from my emptied account. "Read it," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please." I unfolded the pages and began reading silently, aware of his eyes tracking every minute reaction on my face. The letter was beautiful, I had to admit, a masterpiece of fatherly wisdom and apparent vulnerability. He wrote about watching me grow, about the promise he'd made to my grandfather, about how proud he was of my accomplishments. Then came the paragraph about financial responsibility, about how he had protected and nurtured my inheritance. My fingers tightened slightly on the paper, but I maintained my composure. 3 months of theater classes had finally faded off. "Dad," I said, looking up with carefully manufactured tears in my eyes. "This is beautiful." Relief flooded his face. "There's nearly $500,000 in that account, Emma. Your grandfather wanted you to have options in life that most people don't get. $500,000. The exact amount that should have been there, had he not systematically drained it over the past 7 years. "I can't believe it," I said truthfully, folding the letter back into its envelope. "If you want," he continued, emboldened by my apparent emotion, "I could help you invest it properly. The market's tricky right now, but I've got some connections who could." "I'd like some time to think about it," I interrupted gently. "It's a lot to process." He nodded understandingly, reaching across to squeeze my hand. Of course. No rush. The money's been waiting for you all this time. It can wait a little longer." All this time, except it hadn't been waiting. It had been spent on his failing business ventures, his gambling debts, his desperate attempts to maintain appearances in a social circle that had long since moved on without him. Money that had disappeared in increments, starting when I was just 14 years old, when my mother was too sick to notice, and I was too young to understand. "Thank you for protecting this for me," I said, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. He beamed, relieved. "That's what fathers do, Emma. We protect what matters." I smiled back, thinking of the documents hidden in my apartment. The transaction records. The legal counsel I'd already secured. the case being built while he sat there believing his performance had succeeded. "I'm going to make you proud," I promised him. And in that moment, as the golden light of evening faded to dusk around us, my father believed he had gotten away with it all. He didn't know that the countdown had already begun, that every hollow word in his letter only strengthened my resolve. He thought this letter would change everything between us. He was right about that part, at least. 3 months earlier, so for this financial literacy project, I need to interview someone about long-term investment strategies, I explained to my mother over breakfast. The kitchen light flickered above us, another repair my father had promised but never completed. I was thinking I could ask about Grandpa's trust fund setup. It seems perfect for the assignment. Mom's spoon clinked against her coffee mug, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. "Oh, Emma, I don't think that's necessary. Your father handles all of that. But it's my trust fund, right? And I'm turning 21 soon. Shouldn't I understand how it works?" She busied herself wiping a non-existent spill. "Financial matters are complicated, sweetie. Your father's always been the expert in that area." Something in her avoidance tugged at me. Throughout my childhood, the trust fund had been mentioned in reverent tones, like a distant guardian angel watching over my future. Yet, whenever I asked specific questions, the answers remained vague. "I just need some basic details for my project," I persisted. "Maybe Dad has statements or something I could look at." "He's in Chicago until Thursday," she replied, her voice tight. "And his office is, well, you know how particular he is about his things." I did know. Dad's home office had always been strictly off-limits, the door perpetually locked, a sacred space where important family business happened, business that somehow never included me. That afternoon, while Mom was at her book club, I found myself standing outside his office door. The project deadline was just an excuse. A creeping suspicion had been growing in me for months. Dad's business trips that yielded no results. The tense whispers between my parents when bills arrived, the gradual disappearance of luxury from our lives explained away as temporary adjustments. The lock was simple, a basic doorknob mechanism I'd learned to pick during a rebellious phase at 16. Inside, Dad's office smelled of stale cologne and desperation. The once immaculate space was cluttered with papers, empty coffee cups, and scattered sticky notes covered in numbers and names I didn't recognize. I started with the filing cabinet, tax forms, insurance policies. And then, in the back of the bottom drawer, a dusty folder labeled simply Emma's Future. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside wasn't the detailed financial plan I expected, but something far more disturbing. Bank correspondence about irregular account activity, warnings about fiduciary responsibility, and finally, a letter threatening legal action if unauthorized withdrawals continued. The trust existed, or had existed. But something was wrong. I photographed everything with my phone, then carefully returned the documents exactly as I'd found them. That night, couldn't sleep. The phrases from those letters replaying in my mind. The next morning, instead of going to my economics class, I visited the local credit union where my summer job had given me a friendly connection. "Xavier," I said, approaching the assistant manager's desk with my most casual smile. "Remember when you said you owed me for helping with your sister's college application essays? I need to cash in that favor." Xavier looked up, his expression curious. "What do you need?" "Information about an account. One where I'm the beneficiary, but I think something's wrong." His smile faded. "Emma, that's not a small favor. That's potentially my job." I placed my student ID on his desk. "The account should be in my name, with my father as the trustee. If I'm listed as an owner, don't I have the right to know what's in it?" After much persuasion and a promise to keep his involvement secret, Javier agreed to look up basic information. What he found made my stomach drop. A series of withdrawals spanning 7 years, each one labeled as educational expenses or beneficiary maintenance. Withdrawals that had steadily drained an account that once held over $450,000 down to a mere $2. "Are these withdrawals normal?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Javier's uncomfortable expression confirmed it. "For a trust fund, no. These should have required documented justification for educational or health expenses. And these amounts," he pointed to several large withdrawals, "these coincide with your father's business troubles that were in the local paper." I felt sick. Every dream I'd been told was secure. Graduate school, starting my own business, buying a home had been built on an empty promise. All those times Dad had discouraged me from applying for scholarships because we don't need them, Emma, suddenly made perfect sense. Can you tell me when this started? I asked, my voice steady despite the churning in my gut. Xavier scrolled through the records. The first major withdrawal was 7 years ago. March 7th. I didn't need to do the math. 7 years ago, I was 14. My mother had just been diagnosed with the illness that would keep her bedridden for months. While I was sitting in hospital waiting rooms, my father was making his first raid on my future. I need copies of all of this, I said, suddenly decisive. Emma, what are you going to do? I thought about the trust fund my grandfather had established to ensure I would never struggle the way he had. I thought about my father's expensive watches and business trips, maintained even as our home fell into disrepair. I thought about the lies, years of them served with fatherly smiles. I'm going to learn a lot more about finance than this school project ever intended, I replied, the first seeds of a plan taking root. And I'm going to need a good lawyer. As I walked out of the credit union, the spring sunlight felt different on my skin. Something had shifted irrevocably. My father had stolen more than money. He had stolen trust, and in 3 months, when I turned 21, he would have to face what he'd done. So, what do you think? Dad asked, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied air of someone who believed they'd orchestrated the perfect moment. My birthday dinner plates had been cleared, the cake half eaten on the counter. About the letter? I carefully folded it and slipped it back into its envelope, buying myself time. The past 3 months had been an exercise in restraint, gathering evidence while maintaining the appearance of blissful ignorance. It's beautiful, I said finally. I never expected something so personal. His relief was palpable. I've been working on it for weeks. Some things are hard to put into words, you know? Like theft, I thought. Like betrayal. Like the systematic dismantling of someone's future. I was thinking, he continued, riding the wave of what he perceived as my emotional vulnerability. We could meet with my financial advisor next week. Harrison's been managing family investments for years. He could help you understand how to handle this kind of money. Money that didn't exist. An advisor who had likely been complicit, or at least conveniently blind. That sounds great, I replied, maintaining my practiced smile. But can we do it after my finals? I'm swamped with end-of-semester projects. In reality, my finals had ended yesterday. Tomorrow, I had an appointment with Caroline Weiss, my mother's former attorney from her divorce from her first husband. A woman my father had always dismissed as unnecessarily aggressive. Of course, Dad said, magnanimously. No rush. The money isn't going anywhere. No, it already went somewhere into your failing business ventures and personal accounts. I thought, but nodded appreciatively. Want to take a look at the account now? He offered, pulling out his phone. I can show you the balance. It's quite something to see all those zeros. My heart stuttered. Was he bluffing? Had he somehow managed to replace the money in the past 3 months? Actually, I'd rather wait, I said, feigning shyness. Look at it when I'm alone. It's overwhelming. He nodded, understanding completely a hesitation that didn't exist. That's my pragmatic girl. Your grandfather would be proud. My grandfather. I'd been thinking about him more and more lately. The man who'd built a real estate empire from nothing, who'd established a trust fund to ensure his granddaughter would never struggle. Would he recognize what his son had become? I should probably head home, I said, gathering my things. I have an early study group tomorrow. Dad's face fell slightly. You could stay here tonight? Your old room's still the same. Another time, I promised, though we both knew it was a lie. As he walked me to the door, his hand on my shoulder felt heavier than it should have. Emma, I want you to know that everything I've ever done, every decision I've made, was to protect this family. For a moment, I almost faltered. There was such conviction in his voice, such absolute belief in his own myth. Did he actually think he'd protected me by stealing my future? I know, Dad, I said softly. I've always known that about you. It wasn't exactly a lie. I'd always known he was capable of convincing himself that his actions were justified, no matter who they hurt. The next morning, Caroline Weiss's office was exactly what I expected. Meticulous, imposing, and unapologetically feminine. Diplomas and certifications lined the walls, interspersed with abstract art in bold colors. "Emma," she said, rising from behind her desk, "you look just like your mother at your age." "Thank you for seeing me," I replied, taking the offered seat. "Especially on such short notice." Caroline sat back down, adjusting her glasses. "Your message was intriguing. You mentioned financial misconduct?" I placed my folder on her desk, larger now, after months of careful documentation. "My grandfather established a trust fund for me before he died. My father was the trustee until I turned 21, which is tomorrow. And you found discrepancies." "I've found it's empty," I said flatly. "Over $400,000, systematically withdrawn over 7 years. None of it used for its intended purpose, my education and welfare." Her eyebrows rose slightly as she opened the folder, scanning the bank statements and withdrawal records I'd compiled. "These are labeled as educational expenses," she noted. "I've never seen a penny of it. I worked part-time jobs through high school to save for college. I took out student loans for my first 2 years of university because Dad said the market was unfavorable for withdrawals." Caroline's expression hardened as she flipped through more pages. "And you obtained these records how?" "Legally," I assured her. "As the beneficiary, I requested information about my own account." That wasn't entirely true, but I trusted Javier had covered our tracks. "What exactly are you looking for here, Emma? Restitution? Criminal charges?" The question hung in the air. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? My money back? "I want him to face consequences," I said finally. "Real ones, not just family disappointment that he can charm his way out of. He stole my future and lied to my face about it for years. Yesterday, he gave me a letter talking about how proud he was to have protected my inheritance." Caroline was silent for a moment, studying me. "This won't be simple, Emma. Or quick. Or clean. Family financial cases rarely are." "I have time," I replied. "And evidence. And apparently a lot less money to lose than I thought." A slight smile curved her lips. "You remind me of your mother in more than just looks." She closed the folder decisively. "We'll need to move carefully. Your father still doesn't know you're aware of any of this?" "No, he thinks I'm ecstatic about accessing my trust fund. He's offered to help me invest it." "Keep it that way," she advised. "For now, let him believe everything is proceeding as he planned. We'll need to file for a complete financial audit through the estate lawyers who originally established the trust." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. The wheels were in motion. The storm was coming. And my father had no idea he was already standing in its path. The audit request landed like a silent bomb. Caroline had explained it would take approximately 10 days for the paperwork to process and formal notices to be issued. For those 10 days, I continued the performance of my life, the excited daughter planning her future with newfound financial freedom. "What about a condo downtown?" Dad suggested over lunch the following weekend. "Property is always a smart investment. I could help with the down payment if the trust fund isn't enough." The trust fund that didn't exist. The down payment he couldn't afford. "Maybe," I said non-committally. "I'm still exploring options." Each conversation was an exercise in restraint. Every time he mentioned your money or your grandfather's legacy, I had to fight the urge to confront him then and there. But Caroline had been clear. The element of surprise was our greatest advantage. "Financial predators like your father rely on silence and shame," she'd explained during our second meeting. "They believe their victims will never speak up." On the 11th day after filing the audit request, my phone rang at 7:43 a.m. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as his voice, tight with barely controlled panic, filled my ear. "Emma, it's Dad. Call me back immediately. There's been some kind of administrative error with the trust. Nothing to worry about, but I need to talk to you before you hear anything confusing." An administrative error. 7 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars of administrative errors. He called 6 more times before noon. I silenced each one, watching the notifications pile up with a strange detachment. This was only the beginning. By evening, he'd switched to text messages, each one more desperate than the last. "Emma, please call me. This is a misunderstanding. The bank has made serious mistakes in their records." I'm handling it. This is family business. We don't need outsiders involved. I showed the messages to Caroline during our emergency meeting that night. He's received the formal notice, she confirmed, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. The audit request specifically mentioned potential misappropriation of funds by the trustee. He knows this isn't a routine review. What happens next? I asked, both dreading and anticipating the answer. Now we accelerate. I've already submitted the evidence package to both the estate attorneys and the fraud division at First National. The withdrawals were clearly labeled for educational expenses that never materialized. That's not just unethical, it's fraudulent. The word hung in the air between us. Fraudulent. My father, the fraud. There's something else, Caroline added, pulling a document from her briefcase. I've located Marcus Brennan. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Who? Your father's former accountant. He left the firm 3 years ago under unclear circumstances. He's agreed to provide a statement regarding your father's financial practices. Why would he do that? Caroline's smile was sharp. Let's just say Mr. Brennan has been waiting for an opportunity to set certain records straight. The next morning, while I was in class, my mother called. Her voice trembled with emotion. I couldn't immediately identify. Emma, what's happening? Your father says there's some kind of investigation into the family finances. He says you're not returning his calls. I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall outside my classroom. This was the conversation I'd been dreading. Mom, I can't talk about this right now. He's falling apart, Emma. He says his reputation at the firm is at stake. Whatever misunderstanding this is. It's not a misunderstanding, I interrupted quietly. Ask him about my trust fund, Mom. Ask him where the money is. Silence stretched between us. What are you saying? She finally whispered. Just ask him, and when he tells you it was for family expenses, or business investments, or whatever lie he's prepared, ask him why he's been telling me for years that it was still there, growing, waiting for me. I ended the call before she could respond. It wasn't fair to put her in the middle, but she deserved to know the truth too. That afternoon, the real bombshell dropped. My father received formal notice that his position at the family firm was under review due to potential financial improprieties. Caroline hadn't mentioned that part of her strategy. The firm had to be notified, she explained unapologetically when I called her. Your trust was established under their legal umbrella. They're obligated to investigate any misuse of client funds. His professional humiliation triggered a new level of desperation. He showed up at my apartment unannounced that evening, pounding on the door until my roommate threatened to call campus security. I watched through the peephole as he finally left, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The confident man who had handed me that letter on my birthday was dissolving before my eyes. The next day, he sent an email with the subject line, "Please read, explanation." It contained a lengthy justification for temporary reallocation of my trust funds during challenging market conditions. He claimed he'd always intended to replace the money before I turned 21. But a series of unforeseen business setbacks had made that impossible. I never meant to hurt you, he wrote. Everything I did was for our family's stability. Meet with me, Emma. Let me explain in person. We can still fix this without destroying everything our family has built. I forwarded the email to Caroline without reply. His admission of reallocation was another piece of evidence for our case. That night, I finally responded to him with a single text message. I'll meet you tomorrow, your office, 2 p.m. His reply came instantly. Thank you, Emma. We'll figure this out together. I promise. I turned off my phone and stared out my apartment window at the city lights. Tomorrow there would be no more pretending, no more calculated silence. Tomorrow I would look my father in the eye and show him exactly what I'd discovered, and what it would cost him. The trap had been set, baited, and sprung. Now it was time for the confrontation. Dad's office had changed since I'd last visited. The once imposing space now felt diminished somehow. Family photos removed from the walls, empty spaces on shelves where awards had stood. The firm was already distancing itself from him. I wondered if he realized. Emma, he said, rising from behind his desk as I entered. The relief on his face was painful to witness. Thank you for coming. He moved as if to embrace me, but something in my expression stopped him. I placed my leather portfolio on his desk, a graduation gift from my mother, and remained standing. Do you want something to drink? Coffee? Water? He offered, desperate to establish some normalcy. No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I took a breath, centering myself. This wasn't about anger. It was about truth. Let's just talk. He settled back into his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his negotiation posture. I recognized it from childhood arguments, from watching him charm his way through difficult conversations at family gatherings. It was the stance of a man who believed he could control the situation. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, he began, his voice measured and reasonable. The trust your grandfather established has a complex structure, and the audit notification is just a standard procedure that's been misinterpreted. I didn't speak. Instead, I opened my portfolio and removed a stack of papers, placing them methodically on his desk. "What's this?" he asked, confidence wavering slightly. "Bank statements," I replied. "Every withdrawal you made from my trust fund over the past 7 years." His face paled, but he recovered quickly. "As the trustee, I'm authorized to make withdrawals for your benefit. Educational expenses, maintenance costs." March 17th, 7 years ago, I interrupted, sliding one statement forward. $50,000 withdrawn. 3 days later, that exact amount was deposited into Barrett Development LLC, your failing property venture, the one that went bankrupt 6 months later. His mouth opened, then closed. I slid another statement forward. December 2nd, 5 years ago. $75,000. Coincidentally, the same amount you needed to buy out your partner in the downtown project. Emma, business finances are complicated. August 9th, 4 years ago. $30,000. I placed another statement in front of him. Your gambling debt to James Wilton. I have a sworn statement from him, confirming what that payment was for. The color drained completely from his face. You've been investigating me? I've been discovering the truth. There's a difference. I continued laying out documents, withdrawal after withdrawal, each one matched with evidence of where the money had actually gone. None of this was for my education. None of it was for my benefit. It was for you, your business, your reputation, your lifestyle. He pushed back from the desk, standing abruptly. You don't understand what I was facing. The firm was cutting partners. The market was crashing. I was trying to keep our family from losing everything. By stealing my future? I asked quietly. It was temporary borrowing, he insisted, his voice rising. I was going to replace it. With what money, Dad? Your business ventures all failed. Your investments tanked. You were spending more than you earned even as you were draining my trust fund. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of my childhood that, for a moment, I almost faltered. This man had taught me to ride a bike, had cheered at my high school graduation, had held my hand at my grandfather's funeral. If you'd just told me the truth, I continued, softer now. If you'd just said, Emma, we're struggling financially, and I need to use some of your trust fund to keep us afloat, I might have understood. But instead, you lied for years. You let me believe that money was still there, growing, waiting for me. I was protecting you, he insisted, from worry, from uncertainty. You were protecting yourself, I corrected. From shame, from consequences. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. What do you want from me, Emma? An apology? I'm sorry. I truly am. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen. And now, there are consequences. I removed the final document from my portfolio. The settlement proposal Caroline had prepared. What's this? He asked, not reaching for it. Your options. Option 1. You agree to full restitution through liquidation of your assets, including your investment portfolio, your car, and your stake in the firm. You acknowledge the misappropriation in writing, and we handle this privately. His hands shook slightly. And option 2? We let the criminal investigation proceed. Fraud charges, public court, potential jail time. You do that? To your own father? His voice cracked with disbelief. I studied him, this man I'd idolized for so long, whose approval I'd sought in everything I did. The painful truth was that I still loved him, despite everything. You didn't just steal money, Dad, I said finally, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You stole my trust. You stole my security. You stole every dream I had that depended on that money, dreams Grandpa wanted to make possible for me. His eyes filled with tears. Not manipulative ones this time, real ones that spilled down his cheeks. And the worst part, I continued, you thought I'd never find out. You gave me that letter on my birthday believing I'd never discover the truth. You underestimated me, just like you've always done. I pushed the settlement document toward him. You have until tomorrow to decide. Caroline Weiss has the paperwork ready your way. Emma, please, he whispered. We're family. I gathered my remaining documents, closing my portfolio with a decisive snap. Yes, we are. That's why I'm giving you a choice. It's more than you ever gave me. As I turned to leave, he called after me, his voice broken and unfamiliar. I'm sorry, I was desperate. I thought I could fix it before you ever knew. I paused at the door, not looking back. That's the thing about lies, Dad. They don't fix anything. They just delay the inevitable. The office door closed behind me with a soft click, leaving him alone with the evidence of his betrayal and a rescission that would determine both our futures. 1 year later, the morning of my 22nd birthday dawned clear and bright. I sipped coffee on the balcony of my small apartment, watching the city come alive below. My phone remained silent, no birthday message from my father. I hadn't expected one. The legal settlement had been finalized 3 months after our confrontation. Dad had chosen option 1, private restitution over public vilification. His prized Aston Martin, half his stake in the firm, and his investment portfolio had been liquidated to partially restore my trust fund. Not the full amount, but enough to matter. Enough to give me options. Caroline had called it a victory. Most victims of financial abuse never see a penny, she'd explained, especially when it's family. Victims. I'd flinched at the word then. Sometimes I still did. My phone buzzed with a text from Zach. Meeting in 20, bringing the prototype. You ready for this? I smiled, typing back, born ready. See you there. The startup had been Zach's idea initially, a financial literacy app targeted at young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds. Something that would teach them what I'd learned too late, how to protect themselves, how to understand money, how to spot red flags in financial relationships. It's brilliant, Zach had said when I'd pitched my angle for the project in our entrepreneurship class last semester. You've got the perfect story to drive it. My story. It had taken months before I could talk about it without my voice shaking. Now it was the foundation of our business model, the emotional core that resonated with investors. I'd invested most of my recovered funds into the startup. Not because I was certain it would succeed, but because I needed to build something that was entirely mine, something my father had no part in creating. My mother had been horrified at first. You're gambling your future on an app? She'd asked during one of our careful, recalibrated Sunday brunches. After everything that happened, I'm investing in myself, I'd corrected her. There's a difference. Our relationship had suffered collateral damage from the fallout with Dad. She hadn't known about his financial misconduct, but part of me still resented her for not asking more questions, for not being more vigilant. We were working through it, session by session, with a family therapist who specialized in financial betrayal. Dad and I hadn't spoken since the settlement was finalized. He'd sent a letter handwritten like the birthday one, but without the wax seal or expensive stationery. Just plain words on plain paper, acknowledging what he'd done without excuses. It wasn't enough to heal the wound, but it was something. I kept it in my desk drawer, occasionally taking it out when I needed to remind myself that the whole ugly episode had been real. The firm had quietly pushed him into early retirement. Most of our extended family still didn't know the details, just that there had been financial irregularities and a private resolution. Some of them had taken his side, believing he'd been treated unfairly. I'd let them believe what they wanted. The truth wasn't for them. I gathered my materials for the meeting, the pitch deck, the latest user testing results, the projections that showed we might actually break even 6 months ahead of schedule. As I locked my apartment, Mrs. Hernandez from across the hall waved. Happy birthday, Emma, she called. Any big plans? Just work, I replied with a smile. But the good kind of work that had purpose, work that might help others avoid what had happened to me, work that was healing me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The conference room at our small rented office space was already filling when I arrived. Zach and our 3-person development team, Our first investor, a retired financial advisor who'd been moved to tears by our concept. And surprisingly, my mother sitting nervously at the edge of the group. "Mom?" I stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" She stood, smoothing her skirt with uncharacteristic awkwardness. "Zach invited me." "I hope that's okay." I looked at Zach, who shrugged unapologetically. "Thought it was time she saw what you built." What I'd built. Not what had been given to me or taken from me, but what I'd created from the ashes of betrayal. "Actually," my mother said tentatively, "I've been thinking about investing. Not much, but I believe in what you're doing." The words hit me with unexpected force. My mother, who had always deferred to my father on financial matters, was making her own decision. She was changing too. "We'd be happy to have you on board," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "Let me show you what we're working on." As I launched into the presentation I'd rehearsed so carefully, explaining how our app would help young people navigate predatory financial practices and build genuine security, I caught my mother's eye. She was watching me with something I hadn't seen in a long time: pure, uncomplicated pride. Later, as we celebrated the successful meeting with cheap champagne and plastic cups, Zach pulled me aside. "You got something in the mail at the office," he said, handing me a small package. "Came yesterday." The return address made my heart stutter. My father's handwriting. Inside was a small wooden box I recognized from his office, one of the few family heirlooms he'd kept after the settlement. Inside that, nestled in velvet, was my grandfather's pocket watch and a note. "He would want you to have this. He would be proud of who you've become. I am too." I closed the box, sliding it into my bag. Whatever my father felt, regret, pride, shame, wasn't my burden to carry. My future wasn't defined by his mistakes or even by the trust fund he'd stolen and partially restored. My future was the one I was building day by day, decision by decision, with my own hands and mind. The watch was just an object from the past. My gaze returned to the team celebrating our small victory, to my mother laughing with the developers, to the life I was creating. This, not money, not inheritance, not even justice, was the gift I'd given myself. Freedom to build my own legacy on my own terms.